All right, welcome to today's lecture on data analysis. Data analysis is a very important aspect of research work and thesis alike, and we would like to take you through understanding data and qualitative data analysis. So this session will be grouped into two, right? The first part will be on qualitative analysis, and then the next part will be on quantitative analysis, right? All right, so let's move on. What is data? Many times students tend to confuse themselves on what data is, what an information is, and they are not the same. All right, one leads into the other. So data is a piece of information, right, that is collected to answer a research question, right? It's a piece of information that are collected to answer a research question. And every research study begins with a question or an objective. All right, I mentioned in the earlier video in the methodology that you either be required to give a research question or an objective. Okay, some will also require that you bring both. So depending on your department, you know what to work with. So an example, if you are supposed to go with a question, an example will be, why do some students perform better academically than others? Why do people choose one mobile network over another? What challenges do first-year students face at university? And how do patients perceive healthcare services? Now, to answer these questions, we have to collect information from the participants, right? And that information is what we call data. All right, so if you take me, for instance, I have a lot of information, and then once you collect them, you call them data. So I am a man, right? So that is an information from me. My height is, let's say, 180 centimeters. That's an information from me. When you gather all of this information from me, you have data. All right, so that is the thin line between an information and data. So let's use an everyday example. Imagine you want to know which restaurant serves the best food on campus. What do you have to do? You know that you have to ask students. So let's say your sample size is 100 students, right? So you have to know which restaurant do you visit most often. That's the question you would probably be asking these students, right? The next will be, why do you choose that particular restaurant? How would you rate the food quality? How much do you spend per meal? Now, the responses you receive then becomes your data. All right, so that is the cardinal thing you should know about data. Now, data is everywhere. Data is very ubiquitous, just like pathogens are everywhere. All right, now everything you do, you are generating data. Your age is data. It's an information about you, your height, your phone number, the scores from your exam, your social media activity. That is how come when you go onto any social media platform, the moment you watch a particular kind of theme, the analytics or the algorithm of that platform will then be giving you similar information. Why? Because you've given that platform or that algorithm data to be feeding on, right? So you see that if you are if you've been watching videos on, let's say, puppies, subsequent refresh will bring you data or information on what puppies. So they've collected your data, and then that's how useful it has become to their platform. All right, so data is everywhere. Anything you do becomes data. All right, so now why do we analyze data? From all what I've said, you then know that we analyze data, all right, to give us meaningful information. Okay, you have to analyze this raw form of data, your age, your height, all of this information about you. They mean something. What do they mean? They mean you're a young man of this particular height and weight. You are a healthy individual. So once you break these things down, right, then you have a meaningful information. So that is why we need what? Data. All right, that is why we have to analyze the data. So the first thing we have to look at is the raw data. you collect the data from individual responses from your questionnaires, right? And then you organize them, all right, structure them for processing. So usually we call this data cleaning. You organize them, you clean, and then you then start your analysis, where you then transform your data into meaningful information. All right. Now, the information you gain after your analysis is what we call the results. So now the results you gain from this analysis will then give you knowledge. So the knowledge is when you synthesize your results or your findings, right? And then finally you make a decision from the knowledge you have gained. So that is basically the data analysis journey. So an example of a raw data: student D studies for 4 hours, student C studies for 8 hours. The information alone means little, right? But then after you analyze this point, after you transform the raw data of them studying for particular hours, and then you can extrapolate some analysis where we have the average study time of all the students, which is 4.75 hours, and that actually gives you the knowledge of how averagely these students study. All right, you go forward and then you add them into a decision-making tool where you can then tell people, all right, and that can even inform you as to which student does better and who doesn't. All right, so that should give you a fair idea of why data is really important. Now, there's a difference between data and information, as I've mentioned, right? So data, as we can see in this example, these are raw data, okay? And then an information is data that have been organized. Okay, data that has been organized. An example is an average age, which is 21 years. Now, this has meaning, right? This has meaning that averagely, for all these participants or from all these people, they have an average year of 21. Now, once you've gotten this, it doesn't stop there. It should move on to a different stage or a different phase where the information, that is the organized data, now has to be interpreted. And an example of interpretation is that most participants are young adults, right from this information here. It means that most participants are young adults. Now, the most important part, okay, is to look at the types of data we have. All right, even though data is ubiquitous, you have to group them, okay, so that you understand data and then know how to analyze that type of data. Now, the type of data would help you know what and how to analyze the appropriate graphs for that particular data, and then the tests, okay, to run for that particular data. So broad classification, we have qualitative and then quantitative. Okay, so qualitative data, it describes the experiences, the qualities, the opinions, the beliefs, okay, and behaviors of participants. Now, they answer questions such as why, how, what was your experience, okay? And so we look at some examples. A question will be, how do students feel about online learning? Okay, so right after COVID, even during COVID, we were mostly meeting online for Zoom meetings and all that. So researchers needed to know how students feel about online learning to see whether it is something which we can propagate, continue, or something that we have to truncate. All right, so it was after the research that they got answers to realize that, well, in as much as it isn't really effective, it gets the job done, right? And then it is able to bridge gaps between instances where there are issues with being in person to be taught. All right, so that particular collection of data was a qualitative data collection, right? An example, and then a response will be from any participant. I enjoy the flexibility, but internet connectivity is often very poor, right? Then there's another question and a response. But then notice something very important. These responses are words, they are not figures, they are not numbers, right? And so it forms part of a qualitative data. The moment numbers pop in, then we are talking about quantitative. Okay, so that is the difference between qualitative and then quantitative, because with qualitative we are looking at quality of something, not quantity. All right, so let's look at some characteristics of qualitative data. Now, they are descriptive in nature. I'll be showing you more examples as we move on. They are descriptive. One participant say, okay, so most people I use an iPhone because it is durable, it has more theft proof features, and so that's why I like using an iPhone. So it is describing their feeling, right? And then it is also detailed, right? It is contextual. It comes within a particular context. It is rich in meaning, usually expressed in words. And so qualitative data, they always seek for the depth. For quantitative, we are looking at numerical, right? Numbers. So an example is age. Age is always in number. Weight, the height, incomes, GPA, examination scores, amount of money you spend on something. All of these things are numerical, and they are measurable quantities as well. Now, in order to not go much into this, just a table to help you understand the difference that exists. So by nature, qualitatives are words and quantitatives are numbers. Focus. For qualitative, we are looking at the meaning, but for quantitative, we are looking at measurement. For sample size qualitative, they are usually smaller, but then quantitative usually larger. All right, and then analysis, when it comes to qualitative, they are thematic based or pattern based, but then for quantitative, we are looking at statistics, and then we use that to draw our conclusions. So for qualitative, what are the sources of data? Previous videos I've made, I've been mentioning these. All right, we just touch on each and every one of them. So we can have a source such as interviews. Okay, that's the most common one-on-one interview. You meet with the students, you discuss with them, you ask them their question. And then we also have focus group discussions where you group students or you group people of the same cadre or the same group. You ask them questions, you listen to their responses. All right, so that is that. And then for observations, I mentioned one about Jane Goodall, who was observing the behavioral patterns of monkeys, right? Primates, if you want to use that. Okay, and then you can also use some documents you can gain qualitative data from diaries, from reports, from policy documents, from meeting minutes, what have you. You can gain qualitative data from all of these documents. Now, what do we mean when we say we are analyzing qualitative data? All right, most students think that when you read responses and then you write the summary, then you've gotten yourself a qualitative data. That is actually wrong. Okay, that is actually wrong. The correct thing is qualitative data is a systematic process of identifying meaning within textual data. So there is meaning in the text, and then it is your duty to pull out that meaning, okay, to act as a detective to identify that meaning in the text. So the goal is to answer what patterns emerge from the experiences of the participants. Okay, so let's use an example. So the question is, what challenges do students experience during online learning? Now you interview 10 students and then you pick responses from them. Okay, so from student 1, they said internet bundles are expensive. From 2, they said network interruptions affect lectures. 3, electricity outages disrupt classes. And then 4th, online lectures are difficult when internet speed is slow. Now, when you look at this in an instance, you will think that there are different responses. But when you pay close attention to it, they are not. All right? They are not. You get into this later and you understand well. So, once you have collected these information, okay, from these participants, if it is an interview, right, then you need what? Audio recorded information. Okay, so most interviews are audio recorded. All right, you record them, and then before you can analyze it, you have to convert them into text. All right, and in conversion, we call that process transcription. And then we have a lot of tools that can help you to convert the audio into text. So we have in vivo, we have Otter AI, and then we have Descript. Well, some of them are free, some of them too are paid versions. All right, so you look at it and then see which one okay for you to use. All right, so this can help you. Better still, you can also do it manually. You record and then you listen, and then once you listen, you jot down the themes. I'm getting ahead of myself. Once you listen, you put down what they say in text, and then you fish out the next steps. Right? So example, internet bundles are expensive, audio recorded, and then you transcribe it. Internet bundles are expensive. Now you have a written document, not in the audio format. All right, so once you have a written document, you then have to familiarize yourself with the data, with the transcript. Okay, so you have to repeatedly be reading the text, okay, reading the interview, and from this you will be able to see patterns emerging in the text. Okay, so you interviewed 100 people, right? But then you realize that you are seeing some pattern emerging. Well, after the first 50, you realize that the next 50 were virtually saying the same thing. You were virtually saying the same thing the previous 50 were saying. At this point in research, we say that you have reached saturation of data, right? Which means there are no new themes or no new information you are receiving anymore. And so the data has reached what? Saturation. This brings me to let you understand that when we looked at this data, this table, we said that qualitative analysis, we looked at what? Patterns and themes, right? And then we also said the sample size is usually smaller. Good. You remember earlier in the methodology chapter, I mentioned that you have to, for data analysis, you have to calculate the sample size. Well, for qualitative, you also have to calculate for the sample size. But then when you reach saturation, you stop. Okay, so you could realize that, okay, so I did the study, and after I took data from 200 people at 150, I realized that everyone who comes, there is no new information. So your data reached saturation at the 150th individual. You can go on to add the 200 into analysis, no issue, no problem. But then this is just to give you a fair idea of when to stop collecting the data and to not continue to collect the same information. So you have to keep that in mind. The moment you reach data saturation, either stop or you continue for a while, few data more, and then you stop. You familiarize yourself, and then you see some patterns emerging. Now, after you've seen these patterns emerging, you have to code these patterns that you are seeing. Okay, so coding is the heart of qualitative analysis, right? Because they are like tags or labels that you assign to a piece of text or a piece of phrase, right? So for example, the statement the student gave, internet bundles are expensive. What does it mean? It means that there's high cost of internet. So you attach a code to internet bundles are expensive, and then the code is high internet cost. Now, another statement like network interruptions affect lectures. The code is poor connectivity or poor network connectivity. That is a code. So any participant you listen or you read their response and you realize that they are saying network interruptions or network failures or slow network, you know that they are talking about poor network connectivity, so that you don't have to code network interruptions, slow network, and or slow bandwidth or low bandwidth as different things, right? But then you are coding them as the same thing because they carry the same information. Okay, so you have poor network connectivity as a code. Another statement like electricity outages disrupting classes, that is power outage issue. So anything that falls within this class, you code it as power outages. All right, so that you can manage them into concepts. All right, so why do we code? We code because it helps us to organize our information. Okay, the information you have, there are different responses, but then you realize they are almost always saying the same thing or driving at the same thing. So you code and you group all of them into that, right? So an example of coding is category. After coding, similar codes are grouped together like this. So a code can be high internet cost, poor internet connectivity, slow internet speed. These all relate to one group umbrella called internet challenges, right? So you can realize that after each code, or for each code, they also implode into one bigger umbrella of theme, and this one is internet challenges. Another category, power outages, device battery issues, also falls into a category called power related challenges. This is where the theme development comes in, and that is the most basic qualitative data analytical representation you would ever see. Okay, you could ever see. So once you've grouped all of these codes into categories, and then you have thematic or theme development. So category 1 here, category 1, we are saying it is internet challenge. Category 2, power related challenge. So internet challenges, power related challenges, both contribute towards a technological barrier. It is technology issues, and so we have a common theme, which is what? Technological barrier. So now the theme is technological barrier, and then you could see that probably 20 people or 20 participants were all pointing towards technological barrier. So you write from information, you look for the pattern. Once you get the pattern, you code the pattern. Once you code the pattern, you have them into categories. Once you get them into categories, and then you have one single theme. All right, you have one single theme popping up. And that's what you are going to represent in your analysis. Okay, good. So example of a complete analysis. Now you have a research question. What challenges affect online learning? Your raw data, internet is expensive, network is unstable, electricity outages occur frequently. Now you code them. For the first one, internet is expensive, internet cost. Network is unstable, network problems. Electricity outages occur frequently, power outages. These are your codes for each of these data. Now you group them into categories. So internet costs and then network problem, both are internet challenge issues. So these two now forms part of just this category. Then the power outages forms part of power challenges. And then all of these categories fall under technological barrier. And so in your work, when you are representing your data, you write technological barriers instead of internet challenges and all of these. All right? Okay, good. So this is a brief overview of what I've said already about thematic analysis. So you transcribe your audio, you read, you code, put them in categories, you form themes from it, and then you explain, all right? You interpret what you have. Now, presenting qualitative findings. Okay, this is very important. Okay, now how do you present your qualitative findings? Remember, you interviewed number of students or number of participants. You coded, you got categories, and now you have themes, right? So the themes are what you are going to present. And then under the theme, what the participants said under the theme, you quote that individual, right? And what they said. Okay, I'll be showing you an example shortly. So an example is, one participant stated, internet bundles are expensive and difficult to sustain throughout the semester, right? Now, the quotation provides evidence for the theme. Now, this is the evidence for the theme. The theme is what? Technological barriers. And internet bundles are expensive and difficult to sustain throughout the semester. It's an evidence that of a fact, participants said they had technological issues or technological barrier. All right, for you to understand what I'm explaining, let me show you one study we conducted. So we had a study where we had an implementation of an integrated sample referral system. All right, so we usually in Ghana, the sample referral system is siloed. By siloed, I mean that you have only HIV samples being taken from one facility to another. We have TB samples moving from one facility to the other. All right, but then we wanted to see how feasible it would be to pull HIV samples, to pull TB samples, to pull veterinary samples, to pull all these other samples as one, and then move them to a facility who will be able to test these samples. Okay, so it is a pilot. It was a pilot, so we wanted to see the successes and then learn from that. So we had to go in for some interview some lab scientists, some managers, to understand how they see this particular study. All right, good. So we got their responses, and I want to show you how we went about that. So I mentioned that once you have your information, you code, you categorize them, you have a theme, right? So for us, this is a theme we saw for one of them, is that after the whole study, they realized that there was an enhanced efficiency in sample delivery, right? So now we need an evidence which is telling you that yes, actually this is a theme that popped up in the study. So we said, as one laboratory technician described, before the integrated sample referral system, we struggled with unpredictable delivery schedules. Sometimes samples would sit for days waiting for transport. So this is what the patient said, the participant said, and then it is giving the evidence to this theme. Let me go on to another example. So another example is a theme where we say we have improved turnaround time and documentation. What is giving us this evidence? It says that previously it could take weeks to get results back, and tracking the progress was nearly impossible. And we said that this was something a lab supervisor recalled. Let me give you last one, so that we had a lot of them, right? Let me give you just last one. So one theme was enhanced monitoring and tracking. Okay, enhanced monitoring and tracking. And with this, the health worker struggled with sample tracking and status update. As one laboratory technology stated, we had no reliable way to track integrated samples once they left our facility. Few delegated logbooks were only used for the siloed programs HIV, TB, and early infant diagnosis. It was like sending them into a black hole. All right. So once you have your theme, okay, then you bring the information. I'm talking about what actually the patient or participant said. All right. So this is how you present your qualitative data or results, in your results section. All right, good. So we want to look at some common mistakes and lessons we are learning from this whole video. All right, so one common mistake is confusing codes with themes, and from this I don't think you should be confusing yourself anymore. Codes, forms, categories, and then the categories is where you have your themes from. All right, and then using only one participant opinion as a theme. All right, the theme should reflect patterns across multiple participants. Okay, so it shouldn't be that one person is saying that, is giving their opinion, and it wasn't what the general or more than one person was saying. Okay, that is not a theme. A theme is what majority or a group of people are saying. Okay, if it is one person who said that, that is not a theme, that is an opinion. Okay, but if you have the same opinion coming from different people, that is when you can draw the theme from. Okay, so please be mindful of that. But then when you are presenting the results in the results section, you can either go with 1 or 2 of what people said for that particular theme. Now, a third mistake is ignoring contradictory views. Not all participants will agree. That does not mean that you shouldn't bring that in your results, okay? You have to make sure you are bringing all those contradictory views as well. And then 4, no evidence. Themes should always be supported by participant quotation. I cannot overstress this, okay? When you bring a theme, as I showed in our paper, when we brought the theme of turnaround time, increased efficiency in turnaround time, we brought the evidence, okay, of what the person said in regards to that particular theme, okay? And then finally, let's look at the lessons we've learned from this section, okay? So we know we've spoken about what data is, what raw data is, that we have to convert data into what? Information, right? You group the data into information. We have qualitative data, which is non-numerical. We collect them. The sources of collection are interviews, focus group discussions. We can also get them from documents, which is reports, etc. And then we have some of the interviews, or the interviews have to be transcribed into text. Once you transcribe them into text, you code them. Once you code them, you form them into categories, and then the overarching one is developing them into themes, okay? And then once you are done with the thematic representation, you interpret them in your result. Thank you very much for watching this video on qualitative data analysis. The next video will touch more on quantitative, where we realize that students are really finding it difficult. And so if you have any questions, any concerns, drop the questions in the comment section, like this video, and let's continue. Thank you.